Okay, welcome back. For this third video in this series for boundary surveys, I wanted to cover just a couple of ideas that I expressed when I was talking in the woods and it was a little hard to hear, so I want to emphasize just a couple of things. In your packet, I have three maps that relate to the three of the several 19, I think, types of surveys that took place in Ohio. Right up there. One is the old 7 ranges, which is this one. Okay, so that was the first in the series of public land surveys. Literally, it started at East Liverpool, Ohio, at the Pennsylvania line and the geography's line. The other video that I have in the sequence where the young lady is talking about that, that's where she's standing. There's a large monument there, at least near there. And the Pennsylvania line is at the Ohio River is the starting point. So the geographer's line, 1785, which was right at the land ordinance, 1785, was the first baseline. And as the surveyor went to the west, they went 7 ranges. And you'll notice then that the ranges are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So the ranges are basically the columns of lines that go down, and they would go across, and then they would go south until they touch the Ohio River, south till they touch the Ohio River, south till they touch the Ohio River. And then they would begin to number northward the townships. So they would start literally at the Ohio River, whichever range you were in, and simply go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way back north. And you'll notice, and this is the important part, you'll notice that in 1785 system, that each square mile section was 1 to 36. You can kind of see the numbering scheme, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. So you have the numbering scheme. And there were some problems, there were some issues, and this was the first time they had tried this before. So as they learned, they made some modifications. The second was the one that I was talking about while I was standing in the woods. This was the Sims Purchase, or the Miami Between the Miamis, or the Miami Purchase. And this is the one that Israel Ludlow would have started. And I've kind of highlighted a baseline and the meridian. This is literally where I was standing in the video, was at that base point. And that was the starting range. And the idea was that he picked a place that was far enough north so that the bends of the Ohio River would miss it. And they were pretty sharp about where they were. They had done quite a bit of work kind of through there, and they could tell where they were going to wind up. So that was their starting point, was right there. And they ran a baseline. And again, Israel Ludlow lived just about 1, 2, 3 miles to the east, and that was kind of convenient, and all kinds of stories could go on with that. And then Hamilton ended up where the North Meridian line touched the Great Miami River. And this process was to continue, and there were all kinds of issues between what took place. But the thing that's unique, the thing that you want to remember, the thing that's unique, is that these are now ranges. This was called fractional range because it wasn't quite to the Ohio River. It was partly cut off, so it was fractional range 1, fractional range 2, and then entire range 1, entire range 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, on, continue on. But the ranges, east and west lines, doesn't occur anywhere else in the United States. Somebody got the map turned 90 degrees, basically. I don't know what happened. The numbering scheme was different there. I lost a couple of points on my surveying test when I took that the first time, because I thought the whole world, I had done all my surveying right here in Cincinnati and Southwest Ohio, and I thought the whole world was numbered that way. Come to find out, I was the guy who was wrong, and everybody else was right. So occasionally that happens. But there were all kinds of issues. When they got up to the north, somewhere about to that little cross line there, you kind of discovered that they were going kind of crookedy, and General Dayton, he was a military man, decided he was going to fix things and straighten them out So he straightened the lines out, which then caused all kinds of issues between the settlers that already had land in that area, and it went to the state Supreme Court. State Supreme Court issued a ruling that is forever held in surveying all across the United States, and that is no matter how bad the lines were put in, the original monuments controlled. The original lines, as they were staked, are boundary lines. So we try to do a great job and make sure that everything is straight, square, and 90, but the reality is it's just not. So the state government, state Supreme Court issued that ruling, and it becomes quite basic in everything that surveyors do. And that is, if you can find the original lines, walk in the footsteps of the original surveyor, you can find those original lines, they stay where they were. The measurements help you to indicate that. But again, they were measuring with tools that were quite different than the tools we use today, and conditions that were quite different. They were chased by Native Americans, and many of them died in some pretty horrific ways while they were surveying the lands and taking it from the Indians. And that's how it was. And so you go back today with GPS equipment and robotic total stations, and you find that there's differences in those distances. That's to be expected. So our job now as surveyors is to report that. And it gets to be a challenge, particularly in the middle 50s to 60s, when we were kind of good at measuring things, but not great. And 100 foot, was it really 100 foot? Was it 100.03? And you start add up, 100 lots like that. It makes a significant difference. And there's a lot to talk about. But anyway, you'll notice then that the numbering scheme in the Miami Purchase was the same. It was part of the 1785 numbering system, the Land Act of 1785, so it's numbered in the same 1 through 6 to 36 in a township. Same method as the old 7 ranges. By 96, we started to get a handle on this as surveyors and discovered that things, we could make some improvements. For one thing, the other thing that's unique about the Miami Purchase is that, sorry for the glare, about the Miami Purchase is that it was allowed to be run with a compass, just for expediency. It takes quite a bit of time to run lines with solar, to take solar shots, to take measurements to stars and those kinds of things, astronomic north. It takes time and some skill, and they were in a hurry at this point. So they were allowed to, Ludlow and company were allowed to run it with a compass. The issue is that at those days it was about a 5-degree rotation to the east. So if you look on the map that I'm providing, you'll notice that what looks like should be north-south is actually sort of rotated because the map has been put into state plane coordinates, which is at least pretty close to a grid north, which is fairly close to astronomic north, but the compass north had some deflection to it. So those were 2 unique things about the Miami Purchase. By 1796, then again, everything that was west of the Great Miami River then was also going to be, everything from here to the California coast was cut up through this sectionalized land system. And this is the system then that prevailed throughout from that point on, and it is the 1796 system. Again, pretty much the same, ranges kind of go down, and your townships left and right. You'll also notice, however, that the numbering scheme for the 36 changed, and they changed just in the way, figuring in the right place, the way that it's kind of numbered, sort of drops down and goes back and drops down and goes back. And there were reservations, and by that means they held back intentionally certain certain sections of land, kind of like keeping the good lot in the subdivision. There were several of them that were maintained for school purposes, and one of the sections would have been maintained or reserved back, sold at the end for for religious purposes, to establish churches. So the idea of separation of church and state wasn't so cut and dry in 1785 as it is perhaps these days. But the idea was that all of that land then, once we sold all of the property around it, that last piece in the middle was pretty valuable. And it was protected and whatnot. So then now we get a higher dollar, and those money would be then used for schools or for church purposes or for a few other purposes. If they found a salt lick or if they found some valuable mineral, sometimes they would hold that back as well. So a lot of interesting kind of history. I find it fascinating. I just love to go through that. But there were the different systems, and Ohio has all of them. So the old adage is if you can survey in Ohio, you can survey anywhere. Literally, the piece between the Little Miami River and the Scioto River was actually surveyed by colonial methods, Washington and all of that. And that was because the soldiers of the Virginia Army, they were given large amounts of land. And essentially, Virginia ran out of land. They had given all the land to the United States for the new country, and then they were given land to their soldiers, and they ran out of land. They gave it all away. So the United States government kicked back to the Virginia soldiers land based upon their ranking. So Washington actually got a large chunk of land in Claremont, Brown County, I believe it was, and all of the soldiers would have received some amounts of land based upon their rank. And that's called the Virginia Military District. But that was acquired, or that was sold basically by the old methods. You go down the hill, up the holler, go to the tree, and come back. So I say tree because Kentucky is a Virginia military, or is a colonial system survey, and I've included one like that. So the deed that came, we were to survey this a few months ago, maybe years ago now, actually read originally to a mulberry tree. Okay, and this was fairly recent cut up. This was a tree that was dated as early as the mid-90s, late 90s. So I go back just a couple of years ago to reestablish these boundaries, and I'm therefore looking for that tree. Well, I couldn't find the tree up here where it was called for, but I did find the one, the mulberry. Actually, I didn't. I found the tree that was cut down. I found the stump of the mulberry. So I had good clue and indication. It measured out pretty well. There was a large tree stump there. And with a little bit of investigation, you could tell it was mulberry-like and it was about the right age. So I had good justification to go to the center of the stump as the boundary marker. Again, where the original boundary lines go is where it stays. The rest of it got to be a little bit more complicated, but that's another story. I have included a legal description. If you'd like to read through, this is what a modern legal description sort of reads like, and it does go to that property, so you should be able to sort of trace it from one to the other. And again, some of you will get into surveying, and you'll take your civil engineering degree, add some hours, 18 to 24 credit hour, semester hours at Cincinnati State, and then you would be eligible for licensure as a surveyor in Ohio. I just saw literally last week that some of the requirements have come down. You can now get both surveying and engineering experience at the same time. They count some of it at the same simultaneously because there's such a close relationship in land development to that. And there's also a number of hours and how you can acquire those and all of those things. So the State Board of Registration would have that information. You need to look into that if you have some desire to become a licensed surveyor. It is different than a licensed engineer by a lot, but not entirely. So that is my boundary surveying lecture. I could talk about it for months, days, weeks, and years because I love it, but for an hour and a half lecture, I think that's about as much as we could get out of it. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you when you get back. Have a good holiday.